Okay, this is the second interview with Liz Arellano. So, how would you define yourself ethnically?
Technically, I used to define myself as Mexican American, but now, as I've gotten older, I've adopted the term Chicana, because Chicana is a term that gives validation to my Mexican roots, my American roots, but also my indigenous roots, which, is obviously my inner aspect. So I feel like it's always important to validate all three parts of my identity.
Okay. Does this ever change depending on who you're speaking to, whether it's a white American or another Mexican?
Sometimes it does. It really depends on whether the individuals who I'm speaking to understand the term Chicana. A lot of individuals don't know what that means. So if I find myself with someone who has no idea what Chicana means, I'll just be like, all right, forget it, I'm just Mexican American.
Right.
But for the most part, it's Chicana throughout the whole board.
Okay. What do you notice or believe is different about your personal American experience compared to either a white American or an immigrant?
Well, I consider myself a first generation Chicana here in the United States because my parents did come from Mexico and were not born here originally. So I feel like being first generation Chicana or Mexican American or whatever you want to call it is definitely different from being an immigrant experience and from someone who's been here for generations, because from an immigrant experience, although they can come here, they don't have that essential American culture embedded into them right away. For example, for me, it was embedded with me by entering me into schools and by just, interacting with individuals of different cultures, different beliefs. From an American standpoint, who's been here for generations and generations, I feel like I'm also different because I still have that core Mexican culture embedded in me. I mean, my parents have never done anything to really assimilate me into the American culture, whereas a lot of my friends I know identify as Mexican American, don't speak Spanish, don't know what real authentic Mexican food is, don't have cultural traditions. So I feel like as a first generation Chicana, I kind of am able to dabble into both the immigrant experience and also the American experience.
Right, and with language being sort of an identification in and of itself of this identity. Okay. So I talked to you about a cultural binary. How do you think that has either benefited you or created problems?
Cultural binary has definitely done both for me. It has many advantages because it allows me to just be immersed into two cultures, and not a lot of individuals can say that. For example, cultural traditions and just, again, everything that comes into culture, the language, the food, the religion, traditions, everything, for me are really important. And, I mean, my friends have come to appreciate that about me because they always come over and they're like, oh my God, your mom cooks good food. All have the pleasure and the benefit of having these cultural traditions like posadas or, what we do for Navidad and Thanksgiving. It's all surrounded around family, and I feel like a lot of individuals nowadays don't have that core family piece.
Right.
It's also got several disadvantages because at the same time I'm trying to live in the American culture, and at times, the Mexican side gets shrugged off, whether that be rules or expectations or different values. I see a lot of my friends who value education, but I'm coming from a different standpoint. I'm valuing education because I know that my parents have to sacrifice a lot for me and my brother to get this type of education. I feel like it's just different standpoints on that side. So there has been different disadvantages of trying to fit in all the time, but I would say that there have been way more advantages than disadvantages.
Right, okay. That actually brings me to the next question. So, with part of these disadvantages has to do a lot of the time with the clashing or the intersecting between traditional Mexican and traditional American values. So first off, what are your individual values, and which ones do you label as American, and which ones do you label as your Mexican values?
I feel like for me, each of my values have a little bit of both. Although one side is definitely more predominant in my values, and that would be the Mexican side. Some of my core values would definitely be family. Family has always been my number one value because of my Mexican side. I'm not saying Americans do not value family, but I feel like with the Mexican side, you definitely see the cultural difference. For example, in our culture, when individuals get old, no matter what, you still take care of them. You know, you don't put them in a home. Whereas on the American side, I'm not saying every American does this, but that's where a lot of individuals, you know, put their parents or their parents into homes, nursing homes. So I feel like that's definitely a big difference. Another value of mine would be education. And I would say predominantly on the Mexican side, simply because my parents didn't get the best education they could have gotten. But that's why they mattered to me and my brother from day one. A quote that my mom and my dad always said, la gente te puede quitar dinero, tu casa, todo, pero nadie te puede quitar tu educación. So basically translates like, people can take away your money, your house, and everything that you own, but no one can ever take away your education.
Right.
So I feel that's been embedded in me since I was a kid, and that's what, you know, strives me to, as a first generation queer woman of color, to like really strive and get that education. Another value that is really strong to me is community. I feel like a community is just a strong piece of an individual, whatever community that you hold yourself to. And I feel like that's also my Mexican side, because I remember in high school, I used to be involved a lot with the National Hispanic Institute and also with like immigration reform. And I would find myself, you know, rallying and protesting in Chicago, and all around me, that was what I considered to be my community. A community who fought alongside for these rights. So I feel like that definitely is a big piece, because I feel like the American side is really individualistic. You know, they tell you, you have to succeed, you know, you have to come up top. Whereas the Mexican side has always been like, oh, you have to rely on those around you. And, you know, if you go up top, they go up top with you.
All right. So. Okay. This kind of also relates to how some of these values are not only, well, some of them are inherent, others are learned based on our surroundings. So how do you think either your learned American values or your Mexican values have created problems for you?
Some American values that have created, I wouldn't say problems, but have definitely gotten me, you know, in trouble would probably be like trying to fit in and trying to become a part of like the status quo in society. So that would either be like, you know, experimenting with alcohol at a young age, or trying out new things, or like getting tattoos. I'm not necessarily saying it's all American, but I'm saying like in the society that I was built on, like upon a lot of my friends didn't really have strict rules or strict guidelines to like restrict them from doing whatever the heck they wanted, especially in high school. So I felt like in high school I was exposed to a lot of drinking, and you know, I got my first tattoo when I was 16. Why? Because, you know, my white friend was like, oh, because of your parents, they let's just go get a tattoo. Like, so I feel like it's definitely created an area of me second guessing myself, and like going with my second guess, like saying, oh, well, I mean, they can't be that off, like I'm just gonna go with them. So I feel like a lot of my American values have been a form of like second guessing and not really listening to what I was brought up with.
Right. Those are actually really good examples of kind of the first generation Mexican American experience, like the challenges that we go through because of these values, or because of these crashes in values. Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you.